It's going to be a fun and busy week. I hope you'll be a part of our Vacation Bible School. If you'll turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 12, verses 18 to 27, we're going to be looking at a passage that really talks about whether or not there is a resurrection. Now, that's a pretty interesting question. You know, as I wrote this message, I was sitting in my office at home, and it was in my office that my dad breathed his last breath. You know, watching someone die is sobering, difficult, sad, and the loss of their presence never goes away. I know that many of you know that story. The Apostle Paul talks about death in 1 Corinthians 15. Verse 22, he says this, "For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ all shall be made alive." Verse 25, "For he must reign till he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be destroyed is death." No family escapes the reality of death. You might even say that death is our worst enemy. We've just celebrated Memorial Day, and so people were in the cemeteries, and some of us went to the cemetery as well. And I was walking around, and I looked back, and here is James. He's there by my parents' stone, and I overheard what he had to say. He says, "Papa, Gama, it's me, James." He says, "Good news. Holly, Kevin, have a baby." So he's trying to report the news of the family to Grandma and Grandpa. I've told them before, actually, James, I don't think they hear you. You can pray and thank God for your grandparents. But you know what? At this point, he needs to share the news. And we were in the cemetery, and so he did. Death is an undeniable reality, and I hate it so much. As we were driving through the cemetery, James and I were talking about the fact that Grandma and Grandpa are in heaven, and I tried to convince him that heaven would be a great place, and he said, "No, I stay here. I no go to heaven." There is no convincing that boy that heaven is a viable option. He's going to stay here. He also told me, I said, "Well, what about after I die? Will you come to heaven and see me?" He says, "I stay here. I'll take your house." That boy, he's smart in so many ways. Pew Research did a study on what Americans think about the afterlife. This was done at the end of 2021. And they discovered that more Americans believe in heaven than in hell. But by far and away, the majority of people do believe that there is an afterlife. 17%, however, do not believe in any type of an afterlife. When we're done, we're done. One of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, was known as a deist. He believed in a creator God, but he didn't necessarily believe in the afterlife, the resurrection, or any supernatural elements. And he created famously what's called the Jefferson Bible, where he took out the portions that talked about miracles and any reference to the resurrection. When you read the news and you hear people interviewed, whether they're celebrities, artists, entrepreneurs, people are quick to declare whether or not they believe in God. And many are willing to admit, "I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in life after death." And that is their opinion, and they hold to that. One of the guys that you have to admire for being an atheist, but being honest and willing to take what he declares to be true to its complete end, is a famous British philosopher named Bertrand Russell. And he carefully articulates the ramification of his belief system that says there is no God, there is no life after death, and this is what he has to say: "No fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. All labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast depth of the solar system, and the whole temple of man's achievements must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of the universe in ruins. And I have yet to see a greeting card with that on it, because that's pretty depressing. Now, this is not a new idea. This is quite an old discussion. And the reason that we're talking about this today is because in Mark chapter 12, beginning in verse 18, Jesus is confronted by a group of people who were part of the Sanhedrin. They were actually some of the most wealthy and influential leaders in society. And the one distinction between the Sadducees and the Pharisees was that the Sadducees did not believe in an afterlife. They did not believe in a resurrection. And in Sunday school, they helped me remember what this was all about, because they would say the Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection, and that is why they are sad, you see. Okay, so that might help you. So they come to Jesus. We're within a week of his betrayal, death, and then resurrection. Mark chapter 12, verses 18 to 27 goes like this. Read it with me. Then some Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him and asked him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote to us that if a man's brother dies and leaves his wife behind and leaves no children, his brother should take his wife and raise up offspring for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first took a wife, and dying he left no offspring. The second took her, and he died, nor did he leave any offspring. And the third likewise. So the 7 had her and left no offspring. Last, the woman died also. Therefore, in resurrection, when they arise, whose wife shall she be? For all 7 had her as a wife. Okay, this is not 7 brides for 7 sons. This is one bride for 7 sons, all right? This is an exercise in the absurd. And these Sadducees come and they bring forward a very real law that's recorded in Deuteronomy that is designed to make sure that no family line gets forgotten. And so they create this scenario based upon what's called the Levirate law, Levirate marriage laws. And that is truly that it was supposed to be that no family would be forgotten. I mean, there's something beautiful about that statement. And so here is what was taught. If the brother dies leaving no heir, she should be married to the brother, and the first child she has will come to stand for the name of the brother that is gone with no offspring. Now, this is exaggerated, but can you see how ridiculous they are? What is their goal? Their goal is to make Jesus look like he is a fool, okay? They are there to promote their belief that there is nothing after death. There is no afterlife. And so they create this very exaggerated scenario. Now, this whole discussion is better clarified, I think, by a real story that is in the book of Ruth. In the book of Ruth, you see this marriage practiced as it was designed. And so there's Naomi, and then she has 2 daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah, okay. Naomi and her husband and 2 sons leave Bethlehem, go to Moab because of a famine. While they're in Moab, both sons marry these Moabite women. And then her husband dies. and then her first son dies, and then her second son dies. And the great tragedy is a family in Israel will be lost. Now, the way this all worked, and I forgive me for getting into the weeds, but when Israel occupied the promised land, the land was divided proportionately to each tribe based upon how many families were in that tribe. And every family head was given ancestral land that should remain in that family's name in perpetuity. So in Israel, if you actually sold your land because you needed the money, it was more of a long-term lease, because every 49 years there would be the year of Jubilee, and all of the land would revert back to the ancestors, and every family would regain the use of their land. So it was truly, you calculated the value of selling the land based upon how many years was left until Jubilee. So now we have the story of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth refuses to go back to her family. She says to Naomi, I'm going to stay with you. I will go with you. And Naomi says, I'm going back to Israel. And she goes back to Bethlehem. And she's a very sad woman. She goes back empty-handed with no hope of ever having an heir. And Ruth, to survive, gleans from the field of a man named Boaz. Ringing any bells? You should read the book of Ruth. It's a beautiful story. And she comes home, and she has a lot of grain that she's collected. And Naomi says, how did you get so much grain? Well, this man named Boaz was very kind. And in fact, in the book of Ruth, it describes how that Boaz intentionally tells his harvesters, be sure you let some of this intentionally fall to her. So he's blessing this stranger. And Naomi says, wait a second. Boaz is a near kinsman. Actually, Ruth, I want you to go to him. It's going to get weirder. Okay. Uncover his feet. This is weird, isn't it? Welcome to church. Which was a signal that Ruth is a widow, and it would be appropriate for a kinsman redeemer who is willing to marry her and raise up offspring to perpetuate the name of the ancestors. She does that. It's not weird at all. It's a beautiful love story. And she has a baby. And she takes this baby and she puts the baby in the arms of Naomi. Naomi thought her life would be sad forever. Naomi was convinced she would never be able to have an heir to preserve the name of her husband and her family. But then God providentially marries Ruth to Boaz. A baby is born. She takes the baby. I just want to read it. Ruth chapter 4. It's so beautiful. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and the nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has bore him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed, He is the father of Jesse, who is the father of David. These are important people in the history of Israel. And why is this happening? It's because of the Levirate marriage law. Boaz steps in and takes Ruth as his wife. I can't tell you how big this is. Ruth becomes an ancestor to the greatest king of Israel, King David, who is in the lineage of Jesus, the Messiah. Okay, so all of that to say, these guys are just making trouble. The Sadducees are concocting this weird, ugly story of one bride for 7 sons. And then they pose the question, and whose wife will she be in the resurrection? And so their point is, so Jesus, the idea of a resurrection is so absurd, this kind of stuff can't be sorted out if there is such a thing as a resurrection. Okay, notice how Jesus answers them. Boy, Jesus is clear and to the point. And Jesus answered and said to them, are you not therefore mistaken? Because you do not know the scripture nor the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. But concerning the dead, that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the burning bush passage, how God spoke to him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. You are therefore greatly mistaken. I love that verse. You know why? Because when I'm missing my mom and my dad, and Cindy and I had a little talk about how that she sometimes was overwhelmed after losing her daddy when he was only 44 years old, and then her mom, and she says, I take great delight in knowing they're not in their 6th stage before they died. They are not dead. They are thriving in the presence of God, because Jesus said, I am not the God of the dead. I am the God of the living. This is a beautiful passage. And the rebuke to these Sadducees was twofold. Number one, you guys don't know the scriptures. And number two, you do not know the power of God. So let's just take a look at the scriptures. Where in the Old Testament does it talk about a resurrection? Isaiah 26:19. Your dead shall live together with my dead body. They shall arise, awake and sing. You who dwell in the dust, for your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead. So in Isaiah, he talks about your dead shall live. There's a reference to a resurrection. In Daniel, it says this, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. I mean, here we have another passage that talks about how the dead will awake, some to everlasting life. This is in the presence of God. Some to everlasting contempt. You might say that is a place separate from God. Hell, the underworld. I mean, it's there. I love Job so much. Job 19:25-27. A man who suffered so very much. But this is what he says. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. So what is he saying? Even when my body decays, this is Job, perhaps one of the earliest books written. He says, I know that the day is going to come, that in my flesh I will see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eye shall behold, and not another. How my heart yearns within me. Death is certain, and we can't escape it. We will all age out of life. That's a sad reality. From dust we were made, and to dust we will return. And the little boy at church heard this idea, and he was so startled by this idea that we came from dust and we returned to dust. He went home that day, and while he was up in his bedroom, he happened to get on the floor, and he looked under his bed, and under his bed, it was full of dust. In a panic, he jumped up, ran downstairs to find his mom, and said, "Mom, you got to come right now. I looked under my bed, and I don't know if someone is coming or going, but there's plenty of dust under there." Jesus reaffirms the resurrection by saying, "But concerning the dead, that they rise. Have you not read in the book of Moses, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I am the God of the living." Jesus very plainly talks about a resurrection. And then Jesus dies and comes back to life. And his disciples saw him, and they touched him. And they felt the scars in his hand and in his side, and they ate with him. One of the greatest things about the gospel is that Jesus raises from the dead. Now, during his life and ministry, Jesus said, "You don't know the power of God." But during his life and ministry, did you know that there are 3 people that Jesus raised from the dead during his ministry? I wonder if he was doing that because there was this sect, very prominent, very powerful, the Sadducees. They didn't believe in a resurrection. And that is why they were sad, you see. And Jesus began to raise people from the dead. Are you kidding me? The first one was Jairus, his daughter. Jairus' daughter had come to Jesus. "Could you please come to my house? My daughter is so sick, even close to death." Before Jesus could get there, the daughter died, and they told Jesus, "Don't come anymore. She's already dead." Jesus says, "She's not dead. I'm coming anyway." He comes in, and he speaks to her and raises her back to life. That story can be found in Luke 8:40 to 56. Then there's the widow's son in Nain. Jesus sees a widow whose son has died, and the funeral procession is going through Nain, and Jesus, moved with compassion, reaches up and touches the casket. I mean, this is a funeral procession. Touches the casket, and the young man comes back to life. And this is mind-boggling for everybody. And then there was Lazarus in Bethany. Word comes to Jesus, "Your friend Lazarus is sick. You need to go." And Jesus doesn't go. And his disciples say, "Jesus, your good friend Lazarus is very sick. He's about to die." And Jesus says, he's going to sleep. "Well, if he's sleeping, that's good." "No, it's not." Jesus says he's going to die. And he waits 4 days and then returns. And that's when he's met by the sister, and he says this powerful verse in John 11:25. Jesus said to her, this is what he says, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? That's a question for all of us today. And then Jesus died, and he rose again, and he proved that he in fact was the resurrection and the life. That's the power of God. They didn't know it. Lastly, to know that our resurrection is coming is life-changing. Absolutely life-changing. I don't sit in my office and experience long sadness because while I do not like to remember the moment when my daddy died, I can remember the promise of Jesus that if you believe in him, you don't have to do anything but believe in him. This is just like, for whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. If you believe in Jesus, you will be saved. You will also have a resurrection. And I think about that. It makes me give way from the grief to a joy and an anticipation of what's ahead. When Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration, the disciples saw Moses and Elijah, and they recognized them. While life after this life will be different, there will be continuity. You will be known as you are known. We will know each other. I think that the relationships that we have are going to only get richer. I mean, I look out here and I know many of you and I love you. And the more years we spend together, the deeper the relationship goes. And that's why I get so sad at funerals, okay? But one day, when we get into the kingdom of heaven, you're going to like me more. Because I'm going to be transformed. I will no longer have sin. I will no longer be driven by selfishness or all of the things that destroy relationships. You know, after my mom died, I wonder if my mom's going to be mad at me when I meet her on the other side. And then I remembered, no. She's going to love me even more. Because all the junk between us, it'll be gone. How do you get this? Well, Jesus says, whosoever believes in me shall not perish but have everlasting life. The thief on the cross hanging beside Jesus and this thief and the other one as well, they were hours away from their own death. But this thief comes to his senses. It's amazing. Man full of faith. He says, Lord, he cries out to Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says to him, today you'll be with me in paradise. Did Jesus believe in life after death? You better believe it. You know, I've been trying to convince my son James, he's not here so I can talk about him, that he doesn't need to be afraid of heaven, that it's going to be better than anything. And honestly, I can't wait for him to get there because you know why? All of his limitations will be gone. I'm glad he's content to be here now, though. I promise you. But 1 Corinthians 2:9 says this. As it is written, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor have entered into the heart of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. Romans 8:18 says this, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed to us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits For the revealing of the sons of God, it's better than we can even imagine. And the sufferings of this present time, they can't even be compared. You know what that means? An elderly person whose health is so frail, so fragile, and almost gone. To those, they don't have to live in fear because they have a resurrection coming. To you, devastated husband whose wife has left you and you feel so betrayed and so alone, and you don't have to live like a loser. You're not a loser. You have a resurrection coming. You frightened parents of troubled children. You don't have to live burdened by this weight of blame. You have a resurrection coming. An anxious worker out of a job, out of money. A guilt-ridden addict hiding in the shadows. A lonely young person longing to be loved. If you have taken this step, if you have given the leadership of your life to Jesus Christ, you are living in a new reality. Those arms are plenty strong, and they have not lost any of their power, and they will pick you up. Whatever you are in, you have a resurrection coming, and if you have never taken that step, how about now? I'd like to invite you to bow your heads if you would. You know, faith means I'm just going to try. I want resurrection. I want eternal life. I don't have all the answers, but I will be willing to try and just say, Jesus, say it with me. Jesus, if you are in fact the Son of God, I want to believe in you. I want to trust in you. I ask you to forgive me and save me. And I do believe you are the resurrection and the life. I want you. Come into my life. Some people say, well, you mean it's that simple? That seems too easy. Oh, no. Exercising faith and believing is one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But you just got to try. You just got to believe.